If California were a person, its water supply would be running on fumes, and honestly, we're not exaggerating. The Golden State, home to nearly 40 million people and responsible for producing a third of America's vegetables and two-thirds of its fruits and nuts, is facing a water crisis so severe that it's threatening to reshape not just California, but the entire nation's food supply, economy, and way of life. This isn't some distant, hypothetical problem. It's happening right now, and the consequences are already rippling through farms, cities, and households across the state. From the moment Spanish conquistadors first arrived in California, water has been the lifeblood of everything, from the sprawling agricultural empires of the Central Valley to the glittering skyscrapers of Los Angeles and San Francisco. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to talk about at dinner parties. California is essentially living a lie. The state's entire modern infrastructure was built on the assumption of unlimited water, a promise that nature never actually made. Today, that assumption is collapsing faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami, and we're about to explore exactly why California's water crisis could fundamentally end the state as we know it. The story of California's water begins not with innovation or foresight, but with audacity and delusion. In the early 1900s, visionary engineers and ambitious politicians looked at California's arid landscape and decided something absolutely wild. They would build an entire civilization in the desert. And not just any civilization. They would create the agricultural heartland of the nation. To do this, they constructed one of the most ambitious water engineering projects in human history. A network of dams, aqueducts, and canals that would redirect water from the north to the south, from the mountains to the valleys, creating an artificial oasis that defied nature itself. The Central Valley Project, completed in the 1970s, became the backbone of this dream. It allowed farmers to irrigate millions of acres of previously dry land, transforming California into an agricultural superpower. For decades, this system worked brilliantly. California's farms produced food that fed America, generated billions in revenue, and created an entire way of life based on abundance and growth. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. The entire system was predicated on a single catastrophic assumption: that California's water supply was essentially infinite. Engineers designed the system based on the wettest years on record, assuming that water would always flow abundantly from the Sierra Nevada mountains and the Colorado River. They didn't account for droughts. They didn't account for climate change. They didn't account for the fact that you can't sustainably use more water than nature provides year after year, decade after decade. And yet, that's exactly what California has been doing for over a century. The state has been withdrawing water from aquifers faster than they can recharge, draining rivers dry before they reach the ocean, and building an entire economic system on borrowed time. Today, California is experiencing what scientists call mega drought, a prolonged period of dryness that makes previous droughts look like minor inconveniences. Lake Mead and Lake Powell, the two largest reservoirs in the United States, have plummeted to historic lows, revealing ghost towns and sunken boats that haven't seen daylight in decades. The numbers are staggering and frankly terrifying. California's aquifers, which supply about 40% of the state's water during normal years and up to 80% during droughts, have been depleted at an alarming rate. In some areas of the Central Valley, the ground has literally subsided, sunk, by more than 28 feet due to excessive groundwater pumping. Imagine your house settling by nearly 30 feet. That's the scale of geological damage we're talking about. The Colorado River, which supplies about 20% of California's water, is now so over-allocated that it rarely reaches the ocean anymore. Multiple states in Mexico have claims on its water, and those claims add up to more water than actually exists in the river. It's like a bank that has promised out more money than it has in its vault, and the day of reckoning is here. The Sierra Nevada snowpack, which historically acted as a natural reservoir, storing water in the form of snow and releasing it gradually throughout the year, has become increasingly unreliable. Climate change has shortened the snow season, causing more precipitation to fall as rain instead of snow, and causing the snow that does fall to melt earlier in the year. What makes this crisis particularly insidious is that most Californians don't realize how dire the situation actually is. When you turn on your tap in Los Angeles or San Francisco, water still comes out. Restaurants still serve water with ice. Swimming pools still exist. This veneer of normalcy masks a catastrophe unfolding in slow motion. Behind the scenes, water managers are performing increasingly desperate acts of triage, deciding who gets water and who doesn't. Farmers in the Central Valley, who use about 80% of California's water, are watching their allocations shrink year after year. Some are fallowing their land, intentionally not planting crops because there's simply not enough water to irrigate. Others are drilling deeper wells, reaching down into aquifers that took thousands of years to fill, draining them in decades. The state government has imposed restrictions on urban water use, but these restrictions barely scratch the surface of the problem. You can take shorter showers and fix your leaky toilets, but if agriculture doesn't fundamentally change how it uses water, California's crisis will only deepen. The agricultural dimension of California's water crisis cannot be overstated. It's not just a state problem. It's a national emergency masquerading as a regional issue. California's Central Valley produces an astonishing amount of food: almonds, strawberries, lettuce, tomatoes, cotton, rice, and countless other crops that Americans depend on every single day. When you buy a salad at a grocery store in New York, there's a decent chance the lettuce came from California. When you eat an almond, it almost certainly did. California produces 80% of the world's almonds. These aren't luxury items. They're staples of the American diet and major export products that generate tens of billions of dollars annually. The agricultural industry in California is worth approximately $50 billion per year, making it one of the most productive agricultural regions on Earth. But this productivity is entirely dependent on water, and that water is running out. The crisis is forcing farmers into impossible choices. Some are switching to crops that require less water, moving away from water-intensive rice and cotton toward more drought-resistant alternatives. Others are investing in advanced irrigation technologies like drip irrigation and precision agriculture, which can reduce water consumption significantly. But here's the brutal reality. Even with these adaptations, there simply isn't enough water to maintain current production levels. The math doesn't work. California is currently using about 80 billion gallons of water per day, but the state only has access to about 75 billion gallons per day on average. That's a deficit of 5 billion gallons daily, and during drought years the deficit is far worse. This shortfall is being made up by draining aquifers, essentially mining water that accumulated over millennia. And this can't continue indefinitely. Geologists estimate that at current extraction rates, some California aquifers could be depleted within decades. The economic consequences are already materializing. Farmland in the Central Valley, which was once among the most valuable agricultural real estate in the world, is becoming worthless in some areas. Why? Because without water, farmland is just dirt. Farmers are selling their properties at a fraction of their previous value or simply abandoning them. Rural communities that depend on agriculture are experiencing economic collapse. Schools are closing, hospitals are shutting down, and young people are leaving for cities where there are actual job opportunities. This isn't abstract economic theory. It's real people losing their livelihoods, real families being displaced, real communities being hollowed out, and the ripple effects extend far beyond rural California. When California's agricultural output declines, food prices rise nationally. American consumers will pay more for vegetables, fruits, and nuts. Food security becomes a concern. The agricultural industry, which employs hundreds of thousands of people directly and millions more in related industries, faces massive disruption. But the agricultural crisis is just one dimension of California's water emergency. The state's cities are also facing severe constraints. Los Angeles, a megacity of nearly 4 million people in the city proper and over 13 million in the metropolitan area, was essentially built in a desert. The city's entire existence depends on water imported from hundreds of miles away, from the Sierra Nevada mountains via the Los Angeles Aqueduct, and from the Colorado River via the Colorado River Aqueduct. As these sources become less reliable, Los Angeles faces an existential question. How many people can the city actually support? Similar questions plague San Francisco, San Diego, and every other major California city. Urban water restrictions are becoming more severe and more frequent. In 2022, California imposed mandatory water restrictions for the first time in history. Residents were ordered to reduce water consumption by 15%. Lawn watering was restricted, car washing was discouraged, and people were asked to take shorter showers. These measures are just the beginning. As the crisis deepens, restrictions will become more draconian. The quality of life for California's residents is already being affected. During hot summers, when water demand peaks, some neighborhoods experience water pressure so low that water barely trickles from the tap. Wildfires, exacerbated by drought conditions, have become increasingly severe and destructive. In 2020, the August Complex fire burned over 1 million acres, the largest fire in California history at that time. In 2021, the Dixie Fire burned over 960,000 acres. These aren't just natural disasters, they're symptoms of a state under extreme environmental stress. The combination of heat, drought, and water scarcity creates perfect conditions for catastrophic wildfires, and wildfires in turn damage water infrastructure, contaminate water supplies, and force evacuations that disrupt entire regions. It's a vicious cycle. Drought leads to fires. Fires damage water systems. Damaged water systems exacerbate drought conditions. The psychological toll on residents shouldn't be underestimated either. Californians are increasingly anxious about the future. Will there be enough water next year? Will I have to leave the state? Will my property become worthless? These aren't paranoid concerns. They're rational responses to a genuine crisis. The tourism industry, which generates over $140 billion annually for California, is also at risk. Tourists come to California for its natural beauty: Yosemite National Park, Lake Tahoe, the beaches, the mountains. But many of these attractions are being degraded by drought. Lake Tahoe's water level has dropped significantly, affecting recreation and aesthetics. Yosemite's waterfalls, iconic symbols of the park's beauty, flow weakly or not at all during drought years. Ski resorts in the Sierra Nevada are struggling with shorter snow seasons. As California's natural attractions become less appealing, tourism revenue will decline, further damaging the state's economy. The wine industry, another major economic driver, is also vulnerable. California produces about 90% of America's wine, and wine grapes require specific water conditions. Drought stress can damage vines and reduce wine quality. Some vineyards are being abandoned because there's simply not enough water to sustain them. To understand how California arrived at this crisis, we need to examine the historical decisions and policy failures that created this perfect storm. The fundamental problem is that California's water infrastructure was designed for a climate that no longer exists. When the major dams and aqueducts were built in the early to mid-20th century, California's climate was wetter and more predictable than it is today. Engineers based their designs on historical water flow data, assuming that past patterns would continue indefinitely into the future. This assumption was reasonable at the time. Climate science was not advanced enough to predict the changes that would occur, but it was also profoundly wrong. Climate change has altered California's precipitation patterns, increased temperatures, and extended drought cycles. The snowpack that once reliably provided water throughout the summer has become increasingly unreliable. Warmer temperatures mean more precipitation falls as rain instead of snow, and snow melts earlier in the year, creating a mismatch between when water is available and when it's needed. But climate change alone doesn't explain California's crisis. The state has also made a series of policy choices that have exacerbated the problem. One of the most significant is the continued prioritization of agricultural water use over urban and environmental needs. California's water rights system, based on the prior appropriation doctrine, essentially rewards whoever uses water first and most consistently. Agricultural interests, which established their water rights decades ago, have maintained those rights even as the state has become increasingly urban and even as environmental needs have become more urgent. This creates a perverse incentive structure. Farmers have no economic reason to conserve water, because if they don't use their full allocation, they lose their rights to that water. So even during droughts, farmers continue to irrigate at maximum capacity, wasting enormous amounts of water through inefficient practices. Meanwhile, cities and environmental interests fight for scraps. Another critical policy failure is the state's inadequate investment in water recycling and alternative water sources. Desalination, converting seawater into fresh water, could theoretically provide unlimited water for coastal California, but the technology remains expensive and energy-intensive. The state has invested relatively little in desalination infrastructure compared to other water-stressed regions like Saudi Arabia or Australia. Water recycling, treating wastewater to make it suitable for irrigation or even drinking, is another underutilized option. Some California cities have begun implementing recycled water systems, but these remain limited in scope and scale. If California had invested heavily in these technologies decades ago, the current crisis would be far less severe. Instead, the state relied on the assumption of abundant water and neglected to develop alternatives. The political economy of water in California is also deeply problematic. Water rights are valuable property, and those who hold them, primarily large agricultural corporations and some municipalities, have enormous political power. These interests have successfully lobbied against policies that would reduce water consumption or redistribute water from agricultural to urban or environmental uses. Environmental concerns, like maintaining minimum flows in rivers to protect fish populations or preserving wetlands for migratory birds, have consistently been subordinated to agricultural and urban development interests. The result is a system that is economically irrational and environmentally destructive. Rivers that once flowed to the ocean now run dry before reaching the coast. Wetlands have been drained and converted to farmland. Fish populations have collapsed. The Salton Sea, an accidental lake created by a canal break in 1905, is now shrinking and becoming increasingly saline, threatening the birds and fish that depend on it. Population growth has also played a significant role in creating the crisis. California's population has grown from about 1 million in 1900 to nearly 40 million today. Each person requires water for drinking, bathing, cooking, and lawn watering. Each new resident increases water demand. The state's rapid urbanization has meant that more and more people are living in areas that are naturally arid or semi-arid. Las Vegas, Phoenix, and other desert cities have grown explosively, all dependent on water from the Colorado River, which is already overallocated. California's population growth has SL State is still adding hundreds of thousands of new residents annually. This population growth, combined with climate change and policy failures, has created an untenable situation. The Colorado River Compact, signed in 1922, is another historical decision that has contributed to the current crisis. This agreement allocated water from the Colorado River among 7 states and Mexico, based on flow measurements taken during an unusually wet period. The compact allocated 16.5 million acre-feet of water annually, but the river's actual average flow is only about 12.5 million acre-feet. In other words, the compact allocated more water than the river actually contains. This mathematical impossibility has been papered over for decades through various agreements and negotiations. But the underlying problem remains. Too many entities have claims on too little water. As the river's flow has declined due to drought and climate change, the shortfalls have become impossible to ignore. California, which has historically received more than its fair share of Colorado River water, is now being asked to accept cuts. This is economically painful and politically contentious. The immediate consequences of California's water crisis are already visible, but the long-term implications are even more alarming. If current trends continue without significant intervention, California faces a future of severe economic disruption, environmental degradation, and social upheaval. The most obvious consequence will be agricultural decline. As water becomes scarcer and more expensive, many farmers will be forced out of business. Some agricultural land will be abandoned entirely. Other land will be converted to less water-intensive uses or left fallow. This will reduce California's agricultural output, which will have ripple effects throughout the nation's food system. Food prices will rise. Food security will become a concern. Rural communities will continue to depopulate as agricultural jobs disappear. The economic value of agricultural land will plummet, devastating farmers and investors who have built their wealth on that land. Urban areas will also face severe challenges. Water rationing will become increasingly severe and more frequent. During drought years, cities may be forced to implement emergency restrictions that significantly impact quality of life. Lawn watering will be prohibited. Fountains will be turned off. Swimming pools will be drained. Showers will be limited. The aesthetic and recreational aspects of urban life will be diminished. More importantly, if water shortages become severe enough, they could threaten basic public health and sanitation. While California is unlikely to reach a point where there's no water for drinking and bathing, the state would implement emergency measures long before that. The possibility of severe water stress is real. Some neighborhoods, particularly low-income areas that lack political power, may face more severe restrictions than affluent areas. This could exacerbate existing inequalities and create social tensions. The environmental consequences are already severe and will worsen. Rivers that are already running dry will remain dry. Aquatic ecosystems will collapse. Fish populations will decline further. Wetlands will shrink. Wildlife habitat will be destroyed. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, one of the most important wetland ecosystems in North America, is already severely degraded. As water is diverted for human use, the delta will continue to deteriorate. Migratory birds that depend on the delta will decline. Native fish species, already endangered, may go extinct. The ecological damage will be irreversible in many cases. California's natural beauty, which is one of the state's greatest assets, will be diminished. Iconic landscapes, Yosemite's waterfalls, Lake Tahoe's clarity, the Sierra Nevada's snow-capped peaks, will be altered or diminished. The real estate market will experience severe disruption. Property values in water-stressed areas will decline. Farmland will become worthless. Residential properties in areas facing severe water restrictions may also decline in value as people become reluctant to live there. Conversely, properties in areas with secure water supplies may become extremely valuable. This will create a bifurcated real estate market, where location relative to water availability becomes the primary determinant of property value. Some regions of California will become increasingly desirable and expensive, while others will become increasingly undesirable and cheap. This will exacerbate existing geographic inequalities and could lead to significant demographic shifts as people migrate from water-stressed areas to water-secure areas. The political consequences could be profound. Water conflicts between California and other states will intensify. The state will face pressure to reduce its water consumption, which will pit agricultural interests against urban interests, and both against environmental interests. These conflicts could become increasingly bitter and contentious. Water could become a central issue in California politics, potentially leading to significant policy changes. Some of these changes might be positive: increased investment in water recycling, desalination, and conservation. Others might be negative: increased groundwater pumping that further depletes aquifers, or water grabs from other states that create interstate conflicts. The state government will face pressure to make difficult decisions about water allocation, and any decision will create winners and losers. The health consequences are also concerning. Drought and water stress can lead to increased wildfire risk, which has direct health impacts through smoke inhalation and burns, and indirect impacts through displacement and trauma. Water scarcity can lead to increased disease if water quality is compromised or if sanitation is inadequate. Heat stress, exacerbated by drought conditions, can lead to illness and death, particularly among vulnerable populations like the elderly and the poor. Mental health impacts should not be underestimated either. Anxiety about water security, displacement due to drought or wildfires, and the general sense of environmental crisis can take a psychological toll. Some research suggests that environmental stress and climate anxiety are already affecting mental health in California and other climate-vulnerable regions. So what can be done? Is California's fate sealed? Or are there pathways to avoid catastrophe? The answer is that there are solutions, but they require fundamental changes to how the state manages water, uses land, and thinks about growth and development. These solutions are not easy, and they will require sacrifice from various interests, but they are possible. The first and most obvious solution is to dramatically increase water conservation and efficiency. California has made some progress in this area. Urban water use per capita has declined over the past few decades despite population growth. but there is still enormous room for improvement. Outdoor water use, particularly lawn watering, accounts for about 50% of urban water consumption in California. Converting lawns to drought-resistant landscaping could save billions of gallons annually. Indoor water use can be reduced through more efficient fixtures, better insulation, and behavioral changes. Agricultural water use can be dramatically reduced through more efficient irrigation technologies, crop selection, and land use changes. Some estimates suggest that California could reduce water consumption by 20–30% through conservation and efficiency measures alone, without significantly impacting quality of life or economic productivity. The second major solution is to develop alternative water sources. Desalination is one option. While desalination is expensive and energy-intensive, the costs have been declining and will continue to decline as technology improves. California could build a network of desalination plants along its coast to provide water for coastal cities. This would free up fresh water from inland sources for agricultural use. Water recycling is another option. Wastewater can be treated and recycled for irrigation, industrial use, or even drinking water. Some California cities have already implemented recycled water systems, and these could be expanded significantly. Stormwater capture is another option. Capturing and storing rainwater during wet periods for use during dry periods. These alternative sources won't solve the entire problem, but they could contribute significantly to meeting California's water needs. The third solution is to fundamentally rethink agricultural water use. This is politically difficult because agriculture is a powerful interest, but it's economically necessary. One approach is to shift from water-intensive crops like rice and cotton to more drought-resistant crops. Another approach is to implement water pricing that reflects the true scarcity value of water. Currently, agricultural water is often provided at subsidized rates, which creates no incentive for conservation. If water prices reflected its true scarcity value, farmers would have strong economic incentives to use water more efficiently. Some farmers would switch to less water-intensive crops or farming methods. Others might choose to fallow their land or sell their water rights. This would be economically painful for some farmers, but it would lead to more efficient water use overall. The state could provide transition assistance to help farmers adapt to these changes. The fourth solution is to implement stricter land use regulations. California's rapid urban sprawl has consumed enormous amounts of water. New development in arid areas should be restricted or prohibited. Instead, development should be concentrated in areas with adequate water supplies, or in areas where water can be provided through recycling or desalination. This would require changes to local zoning laws and state regulations, which would face opposition from real estate developers and local governments that depend on development for tax revenue. But it's necessary to prevent further exacerbation of the water crisis. Similarly, agricultural land that is currently being irrigated in arid areas should be allowed to revert to its natural state or be used for less water-intensive purposes. The fifth solution is to invest in climate adaptation and resilience. California needs to prepare for a future with less water and more extreme weather. This means building redundancy into water systems, developing emergency response plans, and investing in infrastructure that can withstand drought and other climate impacts. It also means investing in research and development of new water technologies and agricultural practices. Universities and research institutions should be funded to develop drought-resistant crops, more efficient irrigation technologies, and other innovations that could help California adapt to water scarcity. The sixth solution is to address the Colorado River Compact and negotiate new water-sharing agreements. The current allocation system is unsustainable. A new agreement that reflects the river's actual flow and accounts for climate change is necessary. This will require negotiation among 7 states and Mexico, which is politically difficult. But it's necessary to create a sustainable system. California will likely have to accept reduced allocations from the Colorado River, which will be economically painful but necessary. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, California needs to abandon the growth at all costs mentality that has dominated the state's development for the past century. The assumption that California can continue to grow indefinitely, adding millions of new residents and expanding agricultural production, is no longer tenable. The state has finite water resources, and those resources are declining. At some point, growth must stop. This doesn't mean California should shrink or that people should be forced to leave. It means that growth should be managed carefully, with consideration for environmental limits and sustainability. Population growth should be slowed through policy measures like restricting new development in water-stressed areas. Agricultural production should be reduced to sustainable levels. The state's economy should be diversified away from water-intensive industries. These solutions are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they need to be implemented together to be effective. A comprehensive approach that combines conservation, alternative water sources, agricultural reform, land use regulation, climate adaptation, interstate negotiation, and growth management offers the best chance of addressing California's water crisis. But implementing these solutions will require political will, which has been lacking. Various interests will resist changes that threaten their current benefits. Farmers will resist water pricing reforms. Developers will resist land use restrictions. Municipalities will resist growth limitations. The state government will face enormous pressure from these interests. But the alternative to implementing these solutions is allowing the crisis to worsen until California faces genuine catastrophe, economic collapse, mass migration, environmental devastation, and social upheaval. The choice is between difficult changes now or catastrophic changes later. The water crisis is ultimately a test of California's ability to adapt and evolve. The state has faced challenges before and has overcome them through innovation and determination. The question is whether California can muster the political will and social consensus necessary to make the difficult changes required to address the water crisis. If it can, California has a future. If it cannot, the state as we know it may indeed end, not with a bang, but with a slow, agonizing decline as water runs out and the systems that depend on it collapse. The choice, ultimately, is California's to make.